All right, so a survey released by Afrobarometer indicates that South Africans' trust in the police is at an all-time low. More than half of South Africans believe the SAPS is corrupt. Of course, this week, the news that another police commissioner is likely to leave the post early is raising even more questions about stability and trust in the police. Now, the survey was conducted in May and June this year. It polled 1,800 adults. And I'm joined now by Ziyanda Stuurman, author and policing researcher. Thank you so much for your time this evening. So, break down the main findings and how trust in the police has waned over the past 20 years.
Good evening, Sally. Essentially, we have a situation where trust in the police is at truly historically low levels. In the 20 years since Afrobarometer has been measuring public perceptions of various public institutions, the police have come out quite low in previous years. But at this point, we have only about a quarter of South Africans, 26%, who say that they trust the police somewhat or a lot. And that's half of what it was in 2011, when 49% of South Africans said the same thing.
Do you have any understanding of why?
I think that there have been multiple contributing factors, right? So it's the fact that the police themselves are not meeting their own performance targets. So, you know, in terms of incredibly important work around investigating murders, for example, that has slipped significantly in terms of their efficacy at solving that particular type of crime, which is, as a lot of security experts know, one of the best indicators of essentially safety in a country is, you know, murder rate. It certainly hasn't helped that we've had 7 national police commissioners since the year 2000, and 4 of those 7 have left the office under a cloud of suspicion, or quite literally being found guilty of fraud, corruption, and dishonest conduct. So you really have a lot of turmoil within the police, especially at the leadership level, and that trickles down into various other parts of the service, and then the public's perception of the SAPS.
I mean, it's quite astonishing if you look at the fact that, pardon me, 73% of people polled either don't trust the police at all or trust the police just a tiny little bit. I mean, that's really not a vote of confidence at all. Interesting, though, that very few respondents admitted that they felt compelled to bribe, only around 14%. Is that a bit of a contradiction? Is that people not wanting to admit that they've bribed, or is that just a sampling issue?
I think that there are, multiple factors within that. So that 14% is a number that represents the people who positively responded to an earlier question in the survey, which asked, have you been in contact with the police in the past 12 months? So a large number of people said no, that they hadn't been in contact or requested assistance from the police in the past year. And so of those who said yes, that they had, 14% said that they had paid a bribe to receive assistance or to avoid a problem with the police. That number is quite low, and it's much lower than the number of people who perceive some, most, or all of our country's police officers to be corrupt, which stands at about 55%. But you're completely correct in the sense that people do not want to express that they've paid a bribe, and so maybe there is what we would call in survey and polling business noise in that answer.
All right. I suppose the only way to really assess that properly is to look at previous figures and whether more and more people are starting to feel compelled to bribe. Did you draw those stats at all, or not for previous surveys?
So yes, looking at a longitudinal sort of number of survey rounds, there isn't a huge fluctuation or an increase in the number of people who say that they, have had to pay a bribe for assistance. My colleagues at Afrobarometer have more data on sort of corruption within Home Affairs, for example, or within the health sector, and that's also actually a really good indicator of where there are issues around corruption and bribery in public service.
All right. Another part of the survey which is quite interesting, it's how the public rated other public institutions. And the army, I think, topped that list, followed by the courts, the president, the electoral commission, and then of parliament, and then, of course, police, right at the bottom. But that, of course, is not the full gamut of where people place their trust. Just give me a little context there.
Sure. So those were selected institutions that we looked at that were particularly around essentially the politics and security governance of the country. But on a wider level, when we asked, about who South Africans trust the most, actually what ranked highest was independent broadcasters, as well as the media and the National Department of Health. Which has a lot to do with, the past year, particularly around the COVID-19 pandemic, and who the public felt kept them informed and kept them reliably informed without, necessarily spreading fake news, quote unquote, or sort of sensationalist narratives. I find it incredibly interesting that both the police and opposition parties and the ruling party scored the lowest in terms of trust amongst South Africans and as public institutions.
It's actually very interesting whether we trust politicians, and it's a very interesting question that I think might dominate in this coming local election. But just to end back on the fact that over half of us just simply don't trust the police. You've written a book, and the book is a question that I'm going to ask of you. Your book is called Can We Be Safe? So bearing in mind the trust deficit with the police, the problems in the police, can we be safe?
We can, but I think that's going to take an enormous bureaucratic intervention to really capacitate and staff the police in the way that we need it to be. At this point, it is riddled with political interference, political appointments, and really just a lot of turmoil and tumultuous leadership changes that all undermine our own faith in the police, but also individual police officers' morale. And so that's really going to take an incredible amount of leadership and an intervention that's very sorely needed at this point.
Well, thank you so much for chatting to us this evening. We do appreciate your time. That was Ziyanda Stuurman. She's author of the book Can We Be Safe, which is out now, and she's also a policing researcher.